Desana on the 1st of June, 1979. The term Majjhima, or suitability, refers to the application of the Dhamma weapon to encounter and overwhelm any kind of kilesa that might appear. When the strength of this Dhamma weapon matches the strength of the kilesas, then one can withstand them. But there is still the possibility of the kilesas overwhelming and defeating us. But if we are heavy-handed and a lot more forceful than the kilesas, then they will steadily diminish. One will come to see the result, which will testify to the efficacy of one's exertion at this level. Using this particular kind of Majjhima as the means of countering with the kilesas, one will now take up this particular method of practice as the means of treading the path in the future. One must steadily and constantly be doing the work of the suppressing and eradicating of the kilesas. When the kilesas become steadily weakened, the application of the Majjhima Dhamma will be automatically adjusted to the intensity of the kilesas. When the kilesas are violent and vehement, then the Majjhima must be equally forceful and vigorous. One must really stand on one's ground and fight to the death. One must not retreat one step or back down. One must not abandon or let go of one's sati and panya, which is the foremost and the principal weapon, such as during the time when dukkha vedana appears within the body due to sitting for a long time. There will be a lot of pain in the various parts of the body, which becomes more intense and severe. It will yield no result or benefit if we merely endure this dukkha vedana. We must use our endurance and perseverance in our contention and in our struggle. We have to investigate with sati and panya. Panya will have to dig and search, probe and analyze for the truth of the dukkha vedana that is appearing at that time, by constantly having sati controlling and directing the work of panya. Both of these factors must be relentlessly performing their work. One has to investigate to see where this vedana arises. It will be unavoidable that there will be the presumption and assumption that vedana arises from any one particular part of the body. For instance, at the knee, or around the waist, or at the bottom, or at the thighs around the pelvis, or at any other particular part. Whichever part seems to be most profoundly affected by this dukkha vedana is where we have to focus our sati and panya. One has to examine and find out what the cause of this dukkha vedana is, which is appearing at this point. What is it that is being afflicted with dukkha? Is it the flesh? Or is it the skin? Or the sinews? Or the bones at this particular point? One has to examine the flesh and then compare it with vedana. One must find out if they are one and the same thing. Are they similar to one another? The flesh has a physical appearance and characteristic, but dukkha vedana does not have that physical appearance and characteristic. It only manifests its nature of pain and agony naturally. This is the way of differentiating them, so that one can see them clearly as they are. This work of differentiating must depend on sati to do the directing and the concentrating on the work of panya. That is doing the examination and probing into the nature of dukkha vedana and the nature of the flesh. Then one's understanding, perception, and comprehension of this truth can be consistent and continuous. One must not relent in the application of one's sati and panya, as they must always go together in a pair, as they do the investigation into all of the sabbhava dhammas, like vedana and the flesh. If we want to separate the bones out for investigation, and if there are aches and pains in the bone, and we have the understanding that this bone is being afflicted by dukkha, we must then concentrate our attention in looking at this dukkha until we can see it very clearly. Then we have to look at the bone itself to see what kind of characteristic it has. For the bones have distinct characteristic features and colors. But this dukkha has no such feature. It is simply dukkha, similar to the dukkha that we have alleged to be arising from the flesh. It is just presumption to think that the flesh is being afflicted with dukkha. Whether it is the dukkha of the skin, the flesh, or of the bones, it is always of one characteristic nature. But this skin, flesh, and bones are all made up of different things and characteristics. How can they be vedana? Let's consider when a person is dead. The bones, the flesh, and the sinews and skin all still remain. But there is no dukkha. If they are one and the same thing, why is there no dukkha in a dead person, in spite of the fact that the skin, the flesh, the sinews, and the bones are still there? If this is the case, how can we consider them to be one and the same thing? This is one aspect. The second aspect deals with the citta, which is terribly important. We must now separate the citta and look into it. Is the citta afflicted with dukkha? If it is not any single part of the body that is being afflicted with dukkha, then is it the citta that is being so afflicted? We have to look at the citta and at vedana, and also at the body, to see how they are different from one another. All the citta has is just knowingness. Whether dukkha arises, remains, or disappears, this knowingness is still there. Even before this dukkha arose, this knowingness was still there. If the dukkha is the citta, and the citta is dukkha, then when dukkha disappears, the citta must also disappear. The citta should not remain knowing. If they are one and the same thing, then this would be how it would have to be. But the case here is that, when the dukkha vanished, this knowingness still remained. And even before this dukkha arose, the citta also knew. How can they be considered one and the same thing? We have to differentiate and set apart the presumption and assumption, the preconceived notions, and the suppositions of sanya that allege and purport that this thing or that thing is dukkha, then rounding them in and mixing them up until it turns out that these things are dukkha. The flesh is dukkha, the sinews are dukkha, the bones are dukkha, the heart is dukkha. In short, that we are dukkha. And when it gets to the point where we are dukkha, then it can be extremely painful and excruciating. We have to differentiate and analyze so that we can see it clearly as it is. This is one type of Majjhima.